There was always something sinister about the night shift. I worked alone at a small gas station on the outskirts of town. Remote, desolate, and somewhat eerie, it wasn't an ideal place to spend the midnight hours. But the solitude suited me. I found solace in the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights, the soft whir of the coffee machine, and the distant rumble of trucks on the highway. One cold winter night, a dense fog rolled in. It enveloped the station, reducing visibility to a mere few feet outside the windows. I glanced at the clock. It was 2:33 a.m. The silence was deafening, punctuated only by my heartbeat echoing in the small space. Suddenly, I heard a peculiar sound. It was a soft scratching, like someone dragging a stick across the metal siding of the station. I strained my ears, but the sound ceased as abruptly as it had begun. I assumed it was a stray animal and shrugged it off. A few minutes later, the scratching returned, louder this time, followed by a low, guttural growl. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't an animal. My heart pounded against my chest as I cautiously moved towards the window, peering into the foggy void outside. There was nothing. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the station into darkness. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. The silence was replaced by a deafening roar of white noise. I fumbled for my flashlight and swept its beam around the room, but saw nothing amiss. Suddenly, a face appeared in the window. It was grotesque and distorted, with hollow eye sockets and a gaping mouth. I screamed and fell backward, dropping the flashlight. The face disappeared as quickly as it appeared, leaving me in complete darkness. I fumbled around, searching for my phone. I dialed 911, but the line was dead. Panic washed over me. I was trapped, alone in the dark with an unknown entity. I found the flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing an empty room. I moved cautiously towards the door, preparing to make a run for it. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the creature lunged at me. I stumbled backwards, screaming. It was a horrific sight, with its skeletal features and hollow, gaping sockets. It reached out to me with long, bony fingers. I swung the flashlight at it, and it recoiled, hissing. I mustered every ounce of courage and ran past it into the foggy night. I could hear it chasing after me, its guttural growls echoing in the empty street. I stumbled and fell, but managed to pick myself up and keep running until I saw the distant lights of town. I never went back to that gas station. I was left with nightmares and an overwhelming fear of the dark. Some nights, when the fog rolls in and the world is quiet, I can still hear the soft scratching on the metal and the low, guttural growl. And I wonder if the creature is still out there, in the desolate gas station on the outskirts of town, waiting for its next unsuspecting victim. Working the night shift at the old county hospital was a task I had grown accustomed to over the years. The eerie silence that enveloped the building at midnight, the phantom whispers from empty rooms, the chill that would creep up your spine as you passed by the morgue, all became a part of my nightly routine. One night, as I was making my rounds, I felt an unnatural shift in the atmosphere. The air turned denser, colder, and the silence was almost suffocating. My heart pounded against my chest. Something wasn't right. As I turned the corner towards the old wing, the lights flickered and went out, plunging me into oppressive darkness. I reached for my flashlight, but it was dead. I stood frozen, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. Just when panic was about to set in, the lights flickered back to life, revealing an aged, weathered door at the end of the hallway. It was a door I had never seen before. Drawn in by an inexplicable curiosity, I approached the door. It was oddly warm to the touch, a stark contrast to the icy chill of the hospital. Pushing it open, I stepped into a room filled with antiquated medical tools and a single, worn-out, leather-bound book lying on the table in the center. The book was a journal of a doctor who had worked at the hospital in the late 1800s, Dr. Alistair Murphy. As I leafed through the pages, I was drawn into a world of horror and madness. Dr. Murphy had been experimenting on the patients, trying to find a cure for death itself. His notes grew increasingly erratic, his descriptions of the experiments more grotesque and horrifying until they stopped abruptly. My hands shook as I turned to the last entry in the book. "I have found it," it read. "The cure lies not in science, but in the dark arts. Tonight, I shall perform the final ritual." The date was the day the hospital reported Dr. Murphy missing. Suddenly, a chilling wind swept through the room, extinguishing the lights. I felt a presence behind me and slowly turned around to face it. Standing there was a figure, cloaked in darkness. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and lifeless. "Who are you?" I stammered. "I am Dr. Alistair Murphy," it replied, its voice echoing around the room. "And you have disturbed my rest." The room seemed to spin as the reality of the situation hit me. Dr. Murphy, a man long dead, was standing before me. The horror I felt was unlike anything I had experienced before. "What do you want?" I barely managed to whisper. "Your life, in exchange for my rest," he replied. I was paralyzed with fear, but I knew I had to escape. Gathering all my strength, I lunged towards the door. But Dr. Murphy was faster. He grabbed my arm, his grip icy cold, and pulled me back. I struggled, but it was futile. I could feel my energy draining away, my vision fading. As I was on the brink of unconsciousness, I heard a voice, faint but clear. "Release him, Alistair." I looked up to see a figure glowing with a soft light standing at the doorway. It was a woman dressed in nurse's attire from the late 1800s. "Your time has passed. Let him go." With a roar of rage, Dr. Murphy released me. I fell to the ground, gasping for breath. The woman turned towards me, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Go," she whispered, "and never return." I stumbled out of the room and ran, not stopping until I reached the safety of my car. As I drove away, I looked back at the hospital. The old wing was dark, the door gone. The next day, I quit my job. The horrors of that night still haunt me, and I wonder if they always will. But one thing is certain, I will never work the night shift again. I've always been a night owl, so it was no surprise when I took the night shift at the local factory. The calm of the night, the absence of the hustle and bustle, it was my sanctuary. But everything changed a night in November, when my sanctuary turned into my personal horror. It all began when I was assigned to the solitary task of monitoring the assembly line. The job was simple: watch the screens and ensure everything runs smoothly. The factory was a maze of machinery, but at night it was an eerie, empty labyrinth. One night, as I sat in the control room, I noticed a strange glitch on one of the screens, a fleeting silhouette that was there one moment and gone the next. I dismissed it as a trick of my weary eyes, but the shadow returned, this time lingering, morphing into a vaguely human shape. Curiosity piqued, I decided to investigate. Leaving the safety of the control room, I ventured into the dimly lit factory. The air felt unusually cold, the silence unnerving. As I approached the assembly line, I saw it, a shadowy figure standing near the conveyor belt. The figure was tall and shrouded in darkness. I called out, expecting a reply from a lost worker, but there was none. The figure just stood there, unnaturally still. Cautiously, I approached it, but it dissolved into the air, leaving behind a chilling gust of wind. I returned to the control room, heart pounding. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks, but then the figure appeared again on the screen, this time closer to the control room. Fear gripped me, but I had nowhere to run. I was alone, trapped with this entity. I could hear soft whispers now, a language I could not understand. The whispers grew into a cacophony, making my head throb. Suddenly, the screens flickered, and then went blank. The room plunged into darkness. I could feel a presence in the room, an oppressive force that made it hard to breathe. I could feel it move closer, the whispers growing louder. With terror coursing through my veins, I fumbled for my phone, using its dim light to navigate. Just as I managed to switch on the emergency lights, I saw it. The shadow stood in the corner, its form clearer now. It had no discernible features, just a dark, dense form. It moved towards me, its whispers now sounding like screams in my ears. I was paralyzed with fear, my back against the wall. As it loomed over me, I could feel a cold dread seeping into my bones. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The oppressive presence receded. I opened my eyes to find the room empty. The screens flickered back to life, the factory humming as if nothing had happened. I left the factory that night, vowing never to return. But the nightmares followed me. Every night I would see the shadowy figure, hear the whispers. I could no longer differentiate between reality and horror. I am a prisoner now, a prisoner of my own fear. The night, once my refuge, is now my tormentor. I am forever trapped in the shadow of that night, in the chilling whispers of the night shift. A word of caution to you, reader. The night is not just a time of quiet and peace. It's a realm of shadows, and if you're not careful, you might just find yourself lost in its dark, terrifying labyrinth.